Good morning and welcome to this e-class. Since the beginning of these lecture series, I was just thinking of making you acquainted with literary devices, poetic devices and various figures of speech. Because as you read literature, it is very necessary as a student of literature that you should appreciate, you should interpret, and you should also analyze the work which is given to you as works or classics of literature, whether it is poetry or whether it is prose or whether it is drama. So in these lecture series, I would make you acquainted with the literary devices and poetic devices and figures of speech in the episodic way, means taking up 2 or 3 of the poetic and the literary devices in one class and then continuing it in another classes or another lecture. So the question arises that what are literary devices? A literary device is a deliberate use of words, phrases, sounds to convey meanings. So the techniques which help the author, the writer, the poet to achieve his or her purpose is called a literary device. And when employed properly, these literary devices, they help the readers also to appreciate, to interpret and to analyze and understand a literary work. So literary devices, they infuse literal meanings, what words actually say, with figurative meanings, means implications or unexpected connotations and so on. So when these devices, they are used in poetry, they are called poetic devices, and when they are used in prose, they are called rhetorical devices. So a poetic device or the literary device is a way of using words to create meaning. A figure of speech is a type of poetic device. If we take up the purpose of literary devices, then the most important purpose of using the words in a special way is to make the meaning clear or to give us an aspect or an understanding of the author's intention of using those words. Another important aspect of literary devices is to beautify the language. Words, when they are used in such a way as a part of figures of speech or as a poetic device, they grant beauty to the language. They appear to be a beautiful construction in sentences or in stanzas or in lines. Although the literary devices or these poetic devices or figures of speech, they do not have any classifications. They are the terms that you ought to know to understand and analyze the work of literature. But just for the sake of understanding, for a better understanding, I have tried to consider them as a group or tried to provide them a group in better understanding, or so that you can remember these literary devices or these poetic devices when you read or when you understand it through your reading of literature. So the first classification that we are going to take up in this class is based upon comparison. And in this class, in this part of the lecture, we would take up 3 literary terms for discussion: simile, metaphor, and personification. Now, the use of simile, metaphor, and personification are so frequent that you would be identifying them while you would read the works of literature that is prescribed for you or the other works of literature that you would be reading. So Let us first discuss simile. What is a simile? Simile is a comparison between two dissimilar objects. Means this is a comparison of two things that are essentially different. And when we use a simile for these two dissimilar objects or different objects, then there's one point of comparison that is common to both these different objects or dissimilar objects. And simile, if we want to identify simile, then simile uses words of comparison like, as, such as. So it compares two things that are essentially different using the word of comparison like, as, such as. In a simile, when we compare the two objects, we identify that both of these objects, they are dissimilar and they are different. While when metaphor is used, metaphor is a subtle comparison in which an author, he describes a person or a thing using words that are not meant to be taken literally. So metaphor is a sort of an implied simile. It is a word used for transferring the quality of one object to another. Means metaphor is used when two different objects, they are treated as one. It transfers the quality of one object to another, and the two objects, they are treated as one object. So for a better understanding of simile and metaphor, let us take some examples of simile and metaphor. I wandered lonely as a cloud. Now here the point of comparison is I and cloud. Now I and cloud, a person and a cloud are two dissimilar objects. And what is the point of comparison? Wandered. So wandered lonely as a cloud. The word of comparison that is used is as. So this is a simile. Again, take up, she is as tender as a rose. Now here the two dissimilar objects of comparison are she and rose. And what is the quality that is common in them? Tender. And what is the word that is used for comparison? As tender as. So again, this is a simile. The tenderness in the lady and the tenderness of a rose, they are compared. Otherwise, rose and she, they are two dissimilar beings or objects. Take another example. She is as cold as ice. Now, what is the point of comparison? Cold. And who are compared? She and ice. So a lady and ice, they do not have any comparison, but one point of comparison is brought, and that is the coldness. So, and the words of comparison that are used are as. So she is as cold as ice. Take another example. He is tall like a tree. What are the objects of comparison? He and tree. A man and a tree are compared. And which quality is compared in them? Tall. So he is as tall as a tree. And what is the word of comparison that is used in the simile? Like. So take up these examples of simile. In the first sentence, I have wandered lonely as a cloud. Word of comparison as is used. She is as tender as a rose, as is used. She is as cold as ice. He is tall like a tree. So how to identify a simile? It will always use words of comparison like, as, such as, and compare. Take up the examples of metaphor. Camel is the ship of desert. In a metaphor, when two objects, they are being compared, there is no word of comparison that is being used, and therefore metaphor is termed up as an implied simile. Now here camel is actually being considered as a ship. Whatever qualities are there in the ship is in the camel when it is walking through a desert. Take another example. It is the east and Juliet is the west. Now Juliet is a lady, this is from Romeo and Juliet of Shakespeare, and she is considered as west, the direction. Otherwise there's no such thing as comparison, but what all the qualities that are there in the west is there in Juliet. Take another example. All the world is a stage and all the man and women, they are merely players. Again, this is from As You Like It, which is prescribed in your syllabus and written by Shakespeare. And here's the entire word is treated or is compared to a stage, and all the man and women, they are regarded as players. So what metaphor does is it omits, or it does not take in use, it does not make use of words of comparison while comparing two objects. It treats both the objects as one. So when we say he's brave like a tiger, it is a simile because we are using words of comparison like. But when we say he's a tiger, that means it is a metaphor because we are treating tiger and the man as one, having all the qualities of a tiger in that particular person. But while in simile, we are using the comparison of bravery in the man and the tiger. So while you read your poems, identify the simile and metaphor used in them. Another figure of speech which we would discuss in this class is personification. Now, what is a personification? Personification is a figurative language in which non-human things or animals or abstractions, they are represented as having human qualities. So personification is never done to a human being. It is always done to inanimate objects, to non-human things or abstractions, or to animals. So when inanimate objects or lifeless objects or animals, they are treated as human beings and given human actions and emotions, the literary term or the device is known as personification. So take up examples of personification. The wind howled in the night. Now, howling is an activity that is given to wind. Opportunity knocks at the door but once. Now, knocking is a human activity. Here it is given to inanimate object or to an abstraction. The flowers danced beautifully in the meadow. Now, dancing is a human activity, and here flowers, they are dancing. So this is the use of personification. Nor shall death brag, thou wanderest in his shade. Now bragging is a human activity, and here death seems to be bragging. So human activity is given to non-human being or an object, and therefore it is personification. How soon hath time, the subtle thief of youth, stolen on his wing my 23 year. Now thefting is again a human activity, stealing is a human activity, and for whom it is given? It is given to time. So whenever any human activity that is given or attributed to inanimate objects, lifeless objects or animals, it is termed up as personification. All through your readings of literature, you would find many examples of personification. And whenever you read your works of literature, try to identify personification and see how beautifully it has been used in literature and what emphasis or what effect it grants to the language. So, in another class, we would again continue with some other literary terms, try to make them remember and enjoy while you read your literature.